The SUV hit the mailbox hard enough to shear it clean off the post, and for one stunned second, the white wood pole hung in the air like it had forgotten gravity before it snapped against the windshield and spiderwebbed the glass. Nora Whitaker jerked awake with her cheek against the steering wheel and the horn screaming under her. The airbag had not deployed. The engine was still running. So was the wiper blade, smearing rain and blood into a pink blur. Her right hand was locked around her phone. Her left hand was somewhere below the dash, numb, maybe pinned, maybe broken. On the lawn ahead of her, under the floodlight, mounted above a two-car garage, in a quiet Culving Sacramento suburb, a teenage girl in a yellow hoodie was lying half on the walkway, half in the wet grass, one sneaker off, one knee bent at an impossible angle. Nora stopped breathing. Then she started again in short, tearing gulps. No, 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 no. Her voice came out hoarse and thin, like somebody else had borrowed it. The horn cut off when she lifted herself from the wheel. Her seatbelt bit into her collarbone. She fumbled for the buckle, missed it once, found it the second time, and nearly fell out when the door opened against the curb. Cold rain hit her face. It smelled like wet concrete, eucalyptus, gasoline, and the metallic stink of panic rising out of her own skin. Porch lights were coming on up and down the street. Somewhere a dog exploded into frantic barking. Nora stumbled toward the girl, her heels sinking into the strip of soaked grass between sidewalk and curb. "Hey," she said, dropping to her knees so hard pain shot up both thighs. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl's eyes were open. That was worse somehow. Wide, shocked, not fully focused. Young. So young that Nora's stomach turned over. There was blood at her temple. Not much, just a bright line mixing with rainwater. Her lips trembled. "Don't move," Nora said immediately, absurdly, because the girl was obviously not going anywhere. "Don't move. I'm calling 911. "My brother," the girl whispered. Nora leaned close. Rain drummed on the hood of the SUV behind her. The neighborhood looked unreal in the stormlight. Perfect trimmed hedges and beige stucco facades and glowing kitchen windows where families who had nothing to do with this were starting to gather at glass. "What?" Nora asked. "My brother's inside." Nora followed the direction of the girl's eyes toward the house. Front door partly open. Light on in the entryway. Then, she heard it. A second sound beneath the dog. And the weather, and her own blood thudding in her ears. A smoke alarm. Then another. A rapid, shrill chorus. The front room flashed orange. Nora froze. For a moment, her mind split along two tracks. One was clean and professional, an old reflex she had not trusted in years. Scene assessment, triage, priorities, danger. The other was animal terror. She had hit a child. There was a house fire. People were watching. Somewhere in the vehicle behind her, zipped inside the leather work bag on the passenger seat, was a stack of legal exhibits, proving that the real estate developer sitting on Sacramento's housing commission had bribed a zoning inspector, and Nora had taken them without authorization from a sealed mediation file. Her boss had called 6 times in the last 20 minutes. Her ex-husband had texted that their son was missing from home again. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the phone into the grass. Damn it. She grabbed it, swiped, hit 911, put the call on speaker. 911. "What is your emergency?" "Car accident," Nora said, but she was already looking at the open door, already hearing a child coughing inside. "And a house fire. I'm at, I don't know the exact address, suburban development off Fair Oaks. There's a blue mailbox, 2-story beige house. Please just send everybody." "Ma'am, stay on the line. Are there injuries?" Nora looked at the girl in the yellow hoodie, then at the flame pulsing bigger in the window. "Yes." "How many?" The girl's hand caught weakly at Nora's sleeve. "Eli," she said, more urgent now despite the fragility of her voice. "He's 8. Nora's chest tightened. She thought of Owen at 8. Skinny elbows and front teeth too large for his face, refusing to sleep without the hallway light on. She thought of the last thing she had said to him yesterday evening. Sharp and tired and unfair. "Stop making me the bad guy for keeping you alive. There's at least one outside," Nora told the dispatcher. "Possibly one child inside. The structure is active. Do not enter the home if it is on fire, ma'am. Fire is en route." Nora let out a breath that almost became a laugh. The absurdity of that instruction, spoken in a calm script voice to someone kneeling in the rain, while a house filled with smoke 10 feet away, made the world tilt. "Yeah," she said, staring at the doorway. "Okay." But she was already on her feet. "No," the dispatcher said, hearing it in her voice. "Ma'am, do not enter the home." A man from across the street came running over in gym shorts and no shirt, holding a flashlight he did not need. "Jesus Christ," he shouted. "Lily." He dropped beside the girl. Lily, baby, look at me. The girl's face changed when she saw him. Relief, pain, fear. Mr. Bennett, she whispered. Eli. Stay with her, Nora said. No, the dispatcher repeated, louder now. Do not go inside. Nora ignored her. She ran. The front path was slick. The flagstones glossed black under the rain. The smoke hit her at the threshold, thick and bitter, carrying melted plastic, scorched fabric, something chemical from a kitchen cabinet or a battery pack. It flooded her throat and eyes instantly. She pulled the collar of her soaked blazer over her mouth and yelled, Eli. The entryway was warm. The living room to the right was burning at one corner, curtains fully involved, flames climbing the drywall beside a standing lamp that had already gone over. The smoke layer had banked low enough to eat the ceiling lights. A family photo wall ran up the staircase. Snapshots of Disneyland, Little League, one formal portrait with 2 kids and a tired-looking woman in scrubs. No adult answering. No footfalls overhead. Eli, she yelled again. Somewhere deeper in the house, a boy coughed, then cried out once, high and ragged. Kitchen. She moved fast, crouching low the way she half remembered from a long-ago emergency training she had once made fun of at the county office. Her right shoulder hit the hallway table, sending keys and unopened mail scattering. The kitchen was brighter than the living room, not because the flames were bigger, but because the back door stood open to the rain, and strobing through that open rectangle of night was the blue-red flash of the first arriving patrol car. A small boy was curled beneath the breakfast nook bench, both hands over his ears, crying so hard he could barely pull air in between sobs. Hey, Nora said, dropping down. Hey, Eli? I'm Nora. I need you to come with me right now. He stared at her. Kids always stared first. They searched your face like they knew adults lied for a living. Where's my mom? He asked. Heat rolled against Nora's back. Somewhere behind her, the living room glass blew out with a crack like a gunshot. He screamed and tried to back deeper into the corner. Listen to me, Nora said, sharper now, reaching for him. I don't know where your mom is, but your sister is outside and she needs you. Come on. He shook his head violently. I can't breathe. I know. She got both hands under his arms. He was lighter than he should have been. Thin as a bike helmet and a backpack. You don't have to help. Just hold on to me. He clung the second she pulled him free, fingers locking around her neck so tight they dug into skin. She stood, nearly slipped, caught herself on the counter, and saw then what had started it. A grease fire on the stovetop that had crawled to a towel, then cabinets, then leaped when somebody had panicked and thrown water. The microwave door hung open. On the floor nearby sat a toppled pot and a box of mac and cheese gone soggy under the spray from a ceiling leak. Domestic disaster. Ordinary. That almost made it crueler. She carried Eli down the hall. A firefighter in full turnout gear burst through the front door as she reached it, mask on, axe in hand, shoulders massive in the smoke. He took one look at the kid in her arms and shoved them both toward the night. Go, go, go. Outside, the storm felt freezing after the heat. Sirens layered over each other now. Ambulance, engine, police. Neighbors lined the sidewalk in hoodies, slippers, puffer jackets hastily thrown over pajamas. Their faces had that naked communal look Americans got only in emergencies, stripped of privacy and pretending not to stare while staring at everything. The firefighter took Eli from Nora and handed him to a medic. Nora turned immediately toward where Lily had been, but a police officer caught her elbow. Ma'am, stay right here. The girl, medics have her. I hit her. The admission came out before she meant to say it. The officer, a woman about 40 with rain dripping from the brim of her hat, held Nora's gaze for one measured beat. Not cruel, not kind, professional. Okay, she said. I need you to step under the awning and keep your hands where I can see them. Nora laughed once, a dry bark with no humor in it. You think I'm running? I think you're in shock. Same difference. But she let herself be guided to the neighboring porch, where the porch light threw a warm yellow circle over wet cement and potted ferns. From there, she could see almost everything. Lily on a gurney now, neck brace in place, one paramedic cutting away the leg of her jeans, Eli wrapped in a gray blanket, coughing into an oxygen mask, while a firefighter crouched in front of him, speaking with the exaggerated calm of somebody trained not to scare children. The burning house, front windows black and pulsing. The officer handed Nora a second blanket. She didn't realize until then how violently she was shaking. Name? The officer asked. Nora Whitaker. Driver's license? Nora stared at her, then remembered her purse, her car, the blown windshield, the legal file. In the SUV. Okay, we'll get it. The officer clicked a pen. Had anything to drink tonight? No. Any medications? Nora swallowed. Lexapro, this morning. Nothing else. Where were you coming from? A simple question. It landed like a blade. Nora looked past the officer to the SUV, where her bag was still visible on the passenger seat under the dome light. One of the younger cops had opened the door and was peering inside with a flashlight. Her pulse surged hard enough to make her dizzy. If he touched that bag, if he opened it, if the exhibits got logged, then the temporary restraining order on disclosure would be violated, the mediation would collapse, the county would deny everything, and Nora would be the only exposed body in a room full of people paid to stay untouched. She heard her boss, Daniel Kessler, from earlier that afternoon, low and furious over the phone. Do not mistake conscience for strategy. Ma'am? The officer prompted. From downtown, Nora said. True enough. Work. What kind of work? Attorney. That changed the officer's face by maybe 2%. Not enough to call attitude, just enough to signal that every next word would be weighed. Public defender? Civil litigation. Okay. Did you see the pedestrian before impact? Nora opened her mouth and nothing came out. The scene replayed with vicious clarity now that the initial chaos was thinning. The wet windshield, the phone buzzing in her hand with Daniel's 7th call. The text banner above it from Owen's father. He took my car. I can't find him. The momentary glance downward, then the yellow blur in front of her headlights. No, Nora said finally. The officer wrote something. Were you using your phone? Nora could have lied. She knew exactly how to do it. She knew how to shape uncertainty, how to make room for technicalities, how to frame distraction as emergency and emergency as mitigation. She also knew that Lily's sneaker was still lying in the grass 15 feet away, turned on its side and filling slowly with rain. Yes, Nora said. I looked down. The officer nodded once. No triumph in it. Just procedure. Thank you for being honest. Nora almost said. Don't reward me for that. Instead, she watched the younger cop reach through the SUV window and lift her leather bag by one strap. Her whole body locked. Officer, she said too quickly. My work file in there is privileged. The woman followed her gaze. We're retrieving identification, ma'am. I understand, but that file contains sealed documents. Then nobody's interested in reading them. That should have calmed her. It did not. Because she knew how nights went bad. One tired patrol officer, one curious glance, one photo, one leaked page, one headline. County attorney steals records, hits teen outside burning home. She could already hear cable hosts saying the words ethics lapse with delighted contempt. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. Daniel. Then immediately after, her ex-husband, Mark. Then a text from an unknown number that made the blood drain from her face even in the cold. Do not talk to police without counsel. You already have enough problems. She read it twice. No signature, no explanation, just that. Her thumb hovered. The officer noticed. Who's texting you? Nora looked up too fast. I don't know. Can I see? No. The answer was instinctive and immediate. The officer's expression cooled. In the street, firefighters knocked down the visible flames. Steam billowed up in white bursts that looked ghostly in the strobes. A second medic approached the porch. The girl's going to Mercy General, he said to the officer. Possible femur fracture, probable concussion, vitals are hanging in. Nora shut her eyes. Hanging in. Not stable, not fine. Hanging in. And the boy? The officer asked. Smoke inhalation. He goes too. No sign of the mother yet. Search teams making a secondary sweep upstairs. Nora's eyes opened. What do you mean? No sign of the mother? The medic glanced at her, then away, already regretting saying it in front of the driver. Ma'am, there was no adult in the house. She heard the panic rising in her voice, and hated it. The pictures. There was a woman. She works in healthcare maybe. Is she at work? Did she leave them alone? What do you mean no sign? Nobody answered immediately, and the silence was answer enough to be dangerous. From across the lawn came a new voice, male, breathless, breaking on the first word. Lily. A man in hospital scrubs sprinted out of a car that had stopped crooked in the middle of the street. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark hair plastered to his forehead, badge still clipped to his chest. He saw the gurney. He saw the house. He saw Nora on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a police officer beside her. Something in his face closed so fast it was like watching a door slam in high wind. What happened? He shouted. No one answered quickly enough. He pointed straight at Nora. Was it her? Nora stood before she meant to. I didn't see her, she said, the words pathetic the instant they left her mouth. I was on my phone for 1 second, and the man moved toward her with such naked fury that 2 firefighters stepped into his path without discussion. You hit my daughter? He yelled. You hit my daughter in front of my house? Rain ran off his chin. His whole body shook with adrenaline and helplessness. Where's my wife? Nora asked, and the question was a mistake so immediate and so total she wanted to claw it back out of the air. His expression changed again, confusion first, then horror. He looked at the house as if he had not yet allowed himself to understand that one catastrophe had been stacked on top of another. She was home, he said. But now he was saying it to himself. She texted me she was home. Upstairs, through a second-floor window newly lit by a firefighter's lamp, a shape moved behind the smoke. Then someone shouted from inside the structure, sharp and urgent enough that every body on the lawn went still. The father's mouth opened. Nora felt the entire neighborhood hold its breath with him. The father's mouth opened. Nora felt the entire neighborhood hold its breath with him. Then 2 firefighters emerged through the front door carrying a woman between them. Not in the dramatic, upright rush of television rescue, but in the awkward, urgent choreography of trained people managing dead weight and fragile airways at once. One had her under the shoulders, one under the knees. Her scrub top was soaked and blackened. Her hair, once tied back, had come loose and hung in damp clumps across her face. An oxygen mask was already pressed over her mouth, but her arms swung limp with each step. The father made a sound Nora would remember for the rest of her life, a sound so stripped of adult control that it barely seemed human, and the firefighters lowered the woman to the grass where medics were already dropping to their knees. "Rachel," he said, then louder. "Rachel, hey, I'm here. I'm here." He tried to get to her. Somebody held him back for half a second and then realized there was no point. He collapsed beside her, one hand shaking over her shoulder without knowing where it could safely land. Nora watched the medic cut open the front of the woman's scrub top with trauma shears, watched the quick hand signals, watched one medic begin compressions for 2 beats before another stopped him, checked something, repositioned, shouted for a monitor. The rain kept falling with obscene steadiness, as if weather had no obligation to recognize hierarchy, as if suburban lawns and cardiac arrest and family photos and felony exposure all deserved the same indifferent percussion. Nora's own body felt remote to her now, as if she occupied it by paperwork rather than biology. She could still feel the impression of Eli's hands around her neck. She could still smell the fire on her blazer. The officer beside her spoke quietly into her radio, requesting a collision investigator. The words DUI, assessment, vehicular, juvenile victim, active scene drifted past Nora like she was standing outside language. She should call a lawyer. That was what the text meant. She should ask for counsel. She should stop talking. She knew every step. She had instructed clients to do it 100 times, in holding cells and courthouse hallways and fluorescent interview rooms, where young public defenders learned, fast or painfully, that the clean moral impulse to explain yourself could destroy you before truth even got a hearing. But now the father was bent over his wife in the grass. Calling her name like repetition alone could pin her to the world, and Nora's professional instincts felt obscene. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel. Then Mark. Then the unknown number a second time. They will blame you for more than the hit. Delete nothing. Say nothing. Nora stared until the text blurred. The officer noticed again. "Ma'am," she said, firmer now. "I need your phone." Nora's head snapped up. On what basis? Possible evidence of distracted driving. There it was. The legal line. Clean, appropriate, ordinary. Nora's throat tightened. "I'm not consenting to a search. I didn't ask for consent." The officer held out her hand. "You can refuse and I can seize it pending warrant. Your choice." For one reckless second, Nora considered smashing the phone against the porch step. Not because there was some cinematic incriminating message chain hidden there, though there was enough to be damaging. Calls from Daniel, drafts of emails she had not sent, notes about the Housing Commission kickback scheme, photos of copied exhibits she should never have taken. Not because she thought destruction would save her. She knew better. The impulse was simpler and uglier. She wanted one thing tonight to happen by her hand instead of to her. But the fantasy lasted less than a heartbeat. She placed the phone in the officer's palm. "I want that on record as non-consensual," she said, hearing herself, and despising how automatic the phrasing sounded. The officer gave a short nod. "It is." On the lawn, the medics shocked Rachel once. The father flinched as if the current had passed through him. Eli, wrapped in the gray blanket, had started crying again from the ambulance cot, where they were treating him. Not loud now, worn out, rhythmic, the kind of crying children do when the world has turned unstable, but adults keep telling them to breathe. Lily had already gone. The missing shape of her gurney on the curb made everything look rearranged and wrong. Nora looked toward the street and saw, beyond the police tape now going up in quick wet lines, A cluster of neighbors huddled under umbrellas and garage overhangs. A woman held a phone low against her chest, secretly filming. A teenage boy in Crocs whispered to another kid while glancing at Nora with the fascinated cruelty of someone seeing scandal form in real time. This would be on neighborhood Facebook pages before dawn. By breakfast, it would be on local news. By afternoon, somebody would connect her name to Kessler and Wren, and the county development case, and the kind of people who smiled through fundraisers while displacing tenants 3 zip codes away. The house coughed another burst of steam as firefighters finished overhaul. The officer touched Nora's elbow. "You need to come with me to the patrol car." "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this moment." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I'm giving you." Nora went. The back seat smelled like wet vinyl, old coffee, and the faint ghost of bleach. Not filthy, just overused. The kind of smell that told you the public had passed through it in too many moods to catalog. The officer did not close the door immediately. "I'm going to ask some preliminary questions before the traffic unit gets here. You can decline. You can ask for an attorney. You understand that?" Nora looked through the open door at the father on the grass, one hand now on Rachel's forehead, while medics worked around him. "Yes," she said. "Do you want one?" Nora almost answered yes on reflex. Instead, she heard Owen's voice from when he was 16 and furious after his second suspension, standing in her kitchen with a split lip and righteous misery all over his face. "You don't even talk like a person anymore. You talk like every sentence is already in court." It had been meant to wound, and it had. Because he was not wrong. Somewhere along the line, Nora had learned to pre-edit her own humanity into admissible fragments. "Not yet," she said. The officer watched her for a beat too long, as if measuring whether that was brave or stupid. "All right. Tell me what happened." Nora pressed her head back against the partition and closed her eyes. The rain ticked on the roof. The dashboard radio muttered codes and locations and ordinary city damage happening elsewhere because catastrophe had no monopoly on geography. She told it slowly. Downtown office. Leaving late. Rain intensifying. Multiple calls. A text from her ex-husband. She looked down. She looked up. Lily was there. She hit the brakes, but not in time. "How fast?" the officer asked. "I don't know. Maybe 30? 35? The limit is 25. "I know. Why were you on your phone?" "Because her son was missing. Because her boss was calling. Because her life had become a tower of unstable things, and she had started believing that if she kept enough of them moving at once, none would have time to collapse. I was distracted," she said. "That's not a reason. It's a category." Nora turned her face toward her. The officer didn't sound unkind. She sounded tired, precise, maybe even fair. That made it worse. Cruelty was easier to defend against than competence. "My ex-husband texted that my son took his car and disappeared," Nora said. "My boss was also calling." "Your son is how old?" 17. "Had he done that before?" "Not with a car." "But had he run off before?" Nora looked away. "Yes," the officer wrote. "And your boss? Why was he calling repeatedly?" "Because I stole documents that could expose a bribery scheme linking county officials to a developer represented by my firm, and I was deciding whether to hand them to a reporter before midnight." Nora folded her hands in her lap until the knuckles blanched. "Work, emergency," she said. "What kind?" "Privileged." The officer let out a breath through her nose. "You understand how that sounds tonight?" "Yes." "Then help me understand it better." Nora didn't answer. Outside, the father stood abruptly from the grass as medics loaded Rachel onto a stretcher. His face had the chalky color of somebody running entirely on fear. He argued with them about going in the same ambulance, lost the argument, won it again by sheer refusal to let go, and climbed in beside her. One medic took Eli toward another unit. The child twisted in the blanket, looking wildly for his father, then began to shout. A firefighter intercepted him, talked him down, pointed toward the departing ambulance with the practiced gentleness of someone improvising truth suitable for a child in crisis. Nora's chest hurt, not metaphorically, a small, hard ache under her sternum. She breathed around it. "Ma'am," the officer said, following her line of sight. "Stay with me." "Is she alive?" Nora asked. "I don't know." "The mother." "I know who you mean." The officer paused. "I don't know." That uncertainty settled in Nora's body like cold water. There were versions of tonight she could imagine surviving in the public sense. Suspension, bar inquiry, civil suit, headlines, then lesser headlines. A reshuffled career, estranged son staying estranged. There were versions she could not fully imagine because once your negligence fused with another family's grief, proportion stopped behaving. If Rachel died, then Nora would spend the rest of her life occupying other people's certainty about what she deserved. Maybe she deserved it. That thought came and stayed. Not with melodrama, with dull, legalistic persistence. Cause, foreseeability, breach, harm. The familiar architecture of liability now stood inside her like a second skeleton. The traffic investigator arrived just after midnight. A compact man with square shoulders and a rain shell over his uniform. He introduced himself, read her rights in a voice scrubbed of drama, and this time Nora asked for counsel. The words tasted like surrender and relief at once. He nodded, as if she had finally chosen weather-appropriate clothing. Procedure changed immediately. Less conversation, more documentation, photos of her hands, a paramedic checking her pupils and asking whether she had struck her head, a voluntary blood draw request because of the collision severity and prescribed medication disclosure. Nora consented. She had nothing to hide there. The needle entered her arm while she watched firefighters board up the shattered front window of the Bennett's house. Normal American suburbia had begun the first ugly stage of metabolizing spectacle into administration. Tow truck. Incident report. Insurance calls. Temporary plywood, where glass had been. By dawn, coffee cups would appear in neighboring kitchens, and people would say, "Did you hear?" in the half-hushed tone that meant they already had. It was nearly 1 a.m. when a black sedan turned onto the blocked street and stopped at the tape. Daniel Kessler got out holding an umbrella that somebody else had probably handed him from the passenger side. He always looked as if weather should have to negotiate with him first. Mid-50s, trim, silver at the temples in a way that had never once looked accidental. Expensive coat over a suit still sharp despite the hour. He identified himself to the officers, glanced once at Nora in the back of the cruiser, and his entire face settled into the expression he used in settlement conferences when deciding which truth would be most cost-effective. He came to the open door after a brief exchange with the investigator. "Don't say another word," he said. "Not loud, not warm. I already asked for counsel." "Good." His eyes flicked past her to the scene outside, calculating damage like a contractor walking a burned frame. "Did they take your phone?" "Yes." "Your bag?" "I don't know." That was when Daniel actually looked angry, not performatively inconvenienced, but sharpened at the core. "Nora, I was a little busy hitting a teenager and pulling a child out of a burning house." The words landed between them with more force than she intended. Daniel's jaw flexed. He lowered his voice another notch. "The file. I know what file. Do not volunteer anything about it. Those documents are not yours. If they surface, your problem becomes criminal, not professional." Nora stared at him. Rainwater beaded on the open door and slid in narrow tracks to the pavement. "You came all the way out here to protect the firm. I came because your name is on the police blotter and you have the instincts of a martyr when guilty." "I am guilty." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Of a collision, maybe. Of negligence. From what little I know. That does not require you to immolate yourself for every other issue circling this night." Nora laughed softly, exhausted by the accuracy of that phrasing. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Make self-preservation sound like professionalism." Daniel leaned one hand on the doorframe. Up close, the careful polish had cracked enough to reveal fatigue. Maybe concern. With him, it was never pure. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Whatever you think you found in those exhibits, tonight is not the night to become a whistleblower. Tonight is the night to survive first contact with the state." "You knew," Nora said. Not even a question now. "About Halverson and the zoning inspector." Daniel did not answer directly. "This conversation is over." "You knew." He straightened. "I know that intentions become evidence faster than facts do. That's what I know." He stepped back as the investigator approached. And Nora saw something then, in Daniel's restraint, that frightened her more than if he had panicked. He had already moved on to containment. She was not a person in crisis to him now. She was a breach, a leak point, a combustible asset. Across the street, 2 women from the neighborhood had finally begun to cry now that the ambulances were gone and the visible emergency had reduced to wet ash and tape and uniforms. Their tears came late, social and sincere. The way emotion often arrived in communities only once there was enough distance to perform it safely. Nora envied them. Her own grief, if that was the word, felt jammed somewhere below language. The investigator shut the cruiser door, muting the outside into a muffled blue-red aquarium. Nora sat alone. Her wet clothes had gone cold enough to stick to her skin. She could smell smoke in her hair every time she turned her head. On the partition glass, her own reflection floated faintly over the ruined house. 43. Mascara gone, cheek bruising at the edge, mouth set like a woman auditioning for innocence she did not feel. She thought of Owen again. Where he might be, whether he had read local alerts, Seen the blocked road on social media? Heard her name already in some text chain with laughing disbelief. She imagined him behind the wheel of Mark's old Honda, parked outside some friend's apartment complex, staring at a phone screen lighting his face while strangers reduced his mother to a headline. A fresh wave of nausea moved through her. She put her forehead against the cool plexiglass and let herself think what she had refused to think all night, because it threatened to split everything open. If Rachel died, if Lily lost her mother because Nora glanced at a screen, then no explanation about Owen or Daniel, or corruption or pressure, would survive first contact with the fact itself. There were systems around every disaster, yes, structures, incentives, men like Halverson and Daniel. Years of compromise. But at the center of this one was still the oldest and simplest American sin. The private belief that your urgency outweighed everyone else's safety for one more minute on the road. The thought hollowed her out. Outside, Daniel got back into his sedan without looking at her again. The tow truck winched her SUV onto the flatbed. As it lifted, the passenger door swung briefly wider, and the leather bag tipped, spilling a folder partly open onto the seat. Even from the cruiser, she recognized the red stamped line across the top page. Confidential Mediation Exhibit. One of the officers reached in, took the folder, and carried it toward the investigator. Nora closed her eyes. There it was. One thing saved, another fractured. One child pulled from a kitchen, another family pushed toward a different fire. When she opened them again, the house across the street no longer looked like a home at all. It looked like evidence. When she opened them again, the house across the street no longer looked like a home at all. It looked like evidence. By the time they released her from the scene, the rain had thinned to a cold mist that hung low over the subdivision and turned every street lamp into a blurred gold halo. No sunrise yet, just that exhausted hour before dawn when America looked least persuasive, when cul-de-sacs and shopping centers and office parks all seemed to admit, for a little while, that they were only arrangements of concrete waiting for people to ruin each other inside them. Daniel had arranged for a car service instead of taking her himself. Of course he had. Distance with a gesture of care. A young driver in a black suit opened the back door without asking questions, though his eyes flicked once to Nora's smoke-stained blazer and then away with professional discipline. She slid into the leather seat and gave her address. Halfway there, she changed her mind and told him to take her to Mercy General. He nodded into the rearview mirror. The city passed in fragments, fast food signs gone dark, a 24-hour gas station still glowing over rows of wet pumps, a pair of teenage boys in hoodies under the bus shelter smoking with the abstract intensity of the very young. Nora leaned her head against the window and watched Sacramento blur by in wet ribbons. Her body was beginning to inventory itself now that adrenaline was wearing off. Bruised cheek, left wrist swelling, seatbelt burn on her collarbone, a pounding behind the eyes that might become a migraine by daylight if the rest of the catastrophe left any room for one. Beneath all of it, deeper, a slower ache built with each mile. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the relentless pressure of understanding that the night was not over because she had left the street. It was only changing institutions. At the hospital entrance, automatic doors opened on overheated air, carrying antiseptic, bad coffee, floor polish, and the sweet sour fatigue of families who had been awake too long. The ER waiting area glowed under fluorescent panels that made everybody look newly accused. A woman in pink scrubs rubbed her eyes behind the triage desk. A television bolted high in a corner played muted overnight news captions about weather and state budget negotiations, the bright, indifferent crawl of public life, continuing no matter who was in the next room, learning the shape of their grief. Nora stood still for a moment, feeling the texture of the place settle over her skin. Hospitals always made her feel both comforted and exposed. Everything urgent was named here. Everything terminal was translated into forms. There was something brutally honest about that. It also meant there was nowhere to hide from outcomes. She approached the desk. "I'm looking for the Bennett family," she said. Her voice sounded scraped raw. "From the house fire in Arden Oaks. They came in maybe 30-40 minutes ago." The triage nurse's expression changed at once, subtle but unmistakable. Recognition maybe, or just pattern matching. "Car accident. Family fire. Driver shows up. Are you family?" she asked. "No." Nora hesitated. "I was involved." The nurse took that in. Not with sympathy and not with contempt, but with the flattened neutrality of healthcare workers who had long ago learned not to spend themselves on first impressions. "Then I can't share much." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. "You can wait. And if someone authorizes staff to speak to you, they will." Nora nodded and stepped aside. The waiting room chairs were molded plastic in rows, designed to discourage comfort, without quite admitting it. She sat. Across from her, a man in construction clothes dozed with his boots planted wide and his arms folded tight. A college-aged girl held an ice pack to a swollen jaw while texting furiously. Somewhere behind the secure doors, a monitor began to beep in a quick, escalating line, then flattened into silence as a machine was adjusted or an intervention succeeded or failed. Nora stared at the floor. Speckles in the linoleum. Mud tracked in by dozens of shoes. A dropped wristband near a trash can. She thought about Rachel on a stretcher, scrub top, cut open, chest rising only because strangers refused to let it stop. She thought about Lily's leg being straightened by hands that did it every day. She thought about Eli's small voice asking where his mom was. The question still intact because nobody had yet earned the right to answer it honestly. The phone she no longer had seemed to vibrate phantom-like in her palm. Without it, she felt stripped of the illusion of control she had been living inside for years. No messages to check, no calls to dodge, no self-distraction. Just the raw sequence of what had happened, turning slowly toward consequences she could neither speed nor delay. Nora? She looked up sharply. Mark stood near the doors in yesterday's jeans and a zip-up jacket over a t-shirt, his hair damp as if he had showered too fast or been caught in the leftover rain. He had always moved like a man trying not to appear hurried, even when he was. Tonight the effort was gone. His face held anger, fear, and something more complicated that made him look older than 45. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Daniel called me." Of course he had. Daniel liked to secure every perimeter. Mark sat beside her without asking. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between divorced people had its own architecture. The load-bearing beams of old fights and repeated disappointments. The little gaps where affection still existed but could not be trusted with weight. "They found Owen," Mark said finally. Nora's eyes shut on pure reflex. Relief hit so hard it was almost pain. "Where?" "Parking lot behind his friend Jace's apartment in Midtown. Asleep in the car. He'd been drinking." Relief changed shape instantly, acquiring edges. "Is he okay?" "Physically, yes." Mark scrubbed a hand over his mouth. "He's at my place. Furious. Hungover. 17 in every possible way." Nora let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The breath trembled on the way out. "Thank God." Mark turned toward her. "Do you want to hear the part where I'm grateful he's alive? Or the part where I'm furious that while I was trying to find him, you were apparently driving through a neighborhood reading your phone?" She flinched without meaning to. Mark saw it and hated himself for it immediately. She could read that much in the way his shoulders tightened. He had never enjoyed hurting people. He just sometimes decided accuracy mattered more than mercy. "I'm sorry," he said, "not because the content was wrong, but because the timing was." "No," Nora said quietly. "You don't have to be sorry." They sat in the humming fluorescent air while a janitor mopped slowly around the far end of the room, guiding the wet floor sign ahead of him like a tiny, absurd lighthouse. "Did you come here for them?" Mark asked after a while. "Or because you don't want to be alone?" Nora considered lying. The truth arrived in pieces instead. "Both." Mark nodded. "How bad is it?" The question could have meant the Bennetts. It could have meant the legal side. It could have meant Nora herself. She answered the most immediate version. "I don't know. Rachel was alive when they transported. Lily had a possible femur fracture and concussion. Eli had smoke inhalation. And you?" "I'm fine." Mark gave her a look that still, even now, could make her feel like a teenager bluffing competence past a suspicious adult. "You look like hell." She almost smiled. "Almost. Thank you." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend sarcasm means you're functioning." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the muted television. "Daniel said police found some kind of confidential documents in your car." There it was. She should have expected it, yet the words still made her stomach drop. "He told you that?" "He told me enough to know you were in serious trouble before the crash and worse trouble after it." Nora felt the room narrow. "I copied files from a mediation case." Mark looked at her fully now. "Why?" She had spent weeks constructing arguments for herself. Public interest, moral duty, institutional corruption, housing displacement, bribery. All true, or true enough. Yet sitting under fluorescent lights beside the man who knew her habits better than anyone alive except maybe their son, those explanations sounded suspiciously tidy. "Because I found evidence that Halverson paid off a zoning inspector, and the firm planned to bury it in settlement," she said. "And because if they bury it, 3 affordable housing sites become luxury developments, and 600 tenants get priced out over the next 3 years, and nobody with the power to stop it will stop it unless something leaks." Mark absorbed that without interruption. He had once loved her most for the exact quality now endangering her, the way outrage and intelligence fused in her until principle became kinetic. It had also been one of the reasons their marriage failed, because Nora did not know how to set moral combat down at the door, and Mark had grown tired of living in the splash zone of every battle she picked, with institutions too large to notice her until they were ready to crush her. "So, you stole documents," he said. "I copied them. Don't lawyer me, Nora." She looked at her hands. "I was going to send them to a reporter." Mark exhaled slowly through his nose. "And tonight?" "Tonight I was deciding whether to do it. While driving." "Yes." He stood and paced 3 steps away, then 3 back. Careful not to draw attention but unable to keep still. "Jesus." He lowered his voice. "Do you understand how this is going to sound?" "I know exactly how it's going to sound." "No, I don't think you do. Because you're still thinking in terms of truth, eventually saving structure. That's not how people hear stories like this. They hear rich lawyer steals files, ignores kid, crashes car, family burned. That's the version they'll hold in their hands. The words hurt because they were clean. No exaggeration. No malice. Just shape. Nora pressed the heels of her palms to her eyes until color flared behind them. "I know." "Do you?" Mark asked. Then, softer, the anger thinning into something more tired. "Because Owen's going to hear it too." That landed where nothing else had. Her hands dropped. "I know," she whispered again, but now the phrase meant something larger and less manageable. Owen, the boy who had once sat cross-legged on the living room floor building Lego police stations while Nora cooked spaghetti and Mark graded student papers at the table. The teenager who stopped coming home on time, then stopped believing promises, then started wearing contempt like armor because hope had become embarrassing. Nora had spent the last 2 years telling herself his distance came from adolescence, from divorce, from weed and bad friends, and the usual American drift of boys trying on recklessness as identity. Some of it did. Some of it also came from watching his mother preach integrity while taking calls at dinner, break promises for work emergencies, and save her best moral language for public causes instead of private tenderness. She had always believed the scales would balance later. Tonight felt like the bill arriving. A set of double doors opened and a doctor in navy scrubs stepped into the waiting room scanning faces. Mark touched Nora's arm before he even spoke, as if steadying both of them. The doctor approached. "Family of Rachel Bennett?" he asked. Nora stood halfway, then stopped herself. Mark answered before she had to. "Not family. We're connected to the case." The doctor's gaze moved over Nora's bruised face, smoke-streaked clothes, and whatever expression she failed to control. "Mr. Bennett asked that the driver be told this directly," he said. Nora felt every muscle in her body tighten. "Rachel Bennett is alive. She has significant smoke inhalation and secondary cardiac complications likely triggered by hypoxia and stress. She's intubated and in ICU. She remains critical." Alive. The word hit first as relief, then immediately rearranged itself into something unstable. Critical was not safety. Critical was a bridge between verbs. "And the children?" Nora asked. "The daughter has a fractured femur, concussion, and lacerations. She'll need surgery on the leg this morning. The son is stable and being observed." Stable. Surgery. Critical. The hospital had turned the family into tiers of danger, which was both merciful and brutal. Nora swallowed. "Can I see Mr. Bennett?" The doctor hesitated. Briefly, he requested it. Mark's head turned toward her. "Are you sure?" She almost laughed at that. There was nothing in the last 6 hours she had been sure about, except the permanence of having already done it. "No," she said. "But I'm going." The ICU waiting area upstairs was colder and quieter, carpeted in a way meant to muffle panic into decorum. Vending machines hummed beside a wall of framed watercolor prints no one had ever genuinely looked at. Ben Bennett stood at the window with a paper cup in his hand and untouched coffee inside it. He had changed into hospital scrubs borrowed from somewhere or given by staff, pale blue and too loose at the shoulders. Without the soaked rage of the street, he looked less dangerous and more broken, which was harder to face. He turned when Nora entered. Mark stayed by the door, close enough to intervene if this became something else, far enough to honor that it belonged to them now. Ben's eyes moved from Nora's face to her wrist brace, to the smoke marks on her sleeve, then back up. "You went in for him," he said. "Not gratitude, not absolution, just fact." "Yes." Nora's mouth was dry. "I'm sorry." Ben stared at her for so long she felt the phrase shrivel in the air. "That doesn't mean anything to me yet," he said at last. His voice was low and almost conversational, which made it more devastating. "Maybe it never will." Nora nodded because there was nothing else to do. He set the coffee down on the windowsill. His fingers shook once and then flattened against the cup to stop it. Lily asked if she was the reason you didn't stop in time. Nora felt the floor disappear for half a second. What? She said. Maybe if she hadn't run outside to look for her brother's cat. Maybe if she'd stayed in. Maybe you would have seen the turn better. Maybe her mom wouldn't have gone back in when the pan caught fire, because she would have already had both kids by her. He took a breath that failed halfway and had to start over. My 12-year-old is already trying to carry part of what you did. Nora's entire body went cold. The cruelty of it was not in Ben's accusation. It was in the child logic of disaster, that immediate American family instinct, to redistribute guilt into manageable household portions. If no one could stand the randomness, someone must deserve the weight. A daughter, a mother, a driver. No, Nora said, too quickly, voice breaking on the word. No. That is not true. None of this is on her. Ben's eyes filled, but he did not look away. Then tell her. Nora stood perfectly still. Behind the glass wall of ICU corridors, nurses moved with calm, machine-learned purpose, adjusting drips, checking screens, walking lives through the narrow administrative corridor between possible and impossible. Ben picked up the cup again, not to drink, just to occupy his hands. She won't sleep. She keeps asking whether the lady who hit her saved Eli because she felt bad or because she's a good person. He gave a tiny, wrecked laugh with no amusement in it. I didn't know what to say. Nora looked at him, then at the sealed ICU doors beyond him, then briefly at her own reflection in the dark window, layered over the parking garage lights outside. What was she supposed to answer to that? That people were rarely one thing, at the exact moment consequence made the distinction matter? That you could be careless and brave in the same minute, selfish and useful in the same body, guilty and still necessary? Adults loved those complexities because they made mirrors survivable. Children hated them because children still expected cause to sort neatly into character. I don't know what kind of person I am tonight, Nora said, but she should not carry this. Ben nodded once, as if that was not enough, and also all there was. He looked suddenly older than before, the sort of overnight aging crisis could do to a face by stripping it of all non-essential vanity. She'll hear it from me, he said, and maybe from you later, not now. He held her gaze. If Rachel dies, I will hate you in a way I have never hated anyone. If she lives, I still might. Saving my son does not cancel anything. Nora felt the words settle into place inside her, not as punishment, but as structure. Honest. Necessary. I know, she said. This time she did not mean it as defense or ritual. She meant, I accept the geometry. Ben looked toward the ICU doors when a nurse emerged to call his name. He moved before she finished speaking. Then he paused, turned back once, and said, The police were here asking about the papers from your car. They think the fire might have started because Rachel was on a work call when she was cooking. Somebody from the hospital logged a voicemail timestamp. Nora frowned, not understanding at first through the exhaustion. What? They said, if your documents connect to anything my wife was dealing with professionally, they'll want statements. She works compliance for county health facilities. He watched recognition hit her. You didn't know that, did you? No. She had seen the photo on the staircase, the scrubs, the exhausted smile. She had guessed nurse, because that was the easy suburban inference. Compliance was different. Compliance meant forms, reports, procurement trails, oversight. Compliance meant possible intersection. Not a new conflict exactly, not some melodramatic web suddenly thrown over the story, but a grim tightening of existing lines. Halverson's developments had pending approvals for senior care and clinic-adjacent parcels. County Health had reviewed site infrastructure impacts. Rachel Bennett might have touched paperwork Nora had stolen without ever knowing their paths would cross in fire and asphalt. Nora's breath went shallow. Ben seemed to see the realization happen and read enough from her face to hate it for reasons not yet articulated. Whatever this is, he said, if it follows my family into that room, I will make your life smaller than you think possible. Then he turned and went with the nurse through the ICU doors, leaving Nora in the refrigerated quiet with Mark still at the entrance, and dawn finally beginning to gray the windows beyond the parking structure. The night had not ended. It had only found a deeper floor. The night had not ended. It had only found a deeper floor. Nora stood in the ICU waiting area for a few seconds after Ben disappeared, unable to trust her legs to choose a direction without instruction. The overhead vents breathed refrigerated air across the back of her neck. Somewhere down the corridor, a printer spat out paper in short, efficient bursts. A nurse laughed once at something soft and private at a station desk, then caught herself and lowered her voice as if joy here had to wear shoe covers. Mark approached slowly, not crowding her, hands in the pockets of his jacket like he was trying to keep them from reaching for solutions that did not exist. What did he say? He asked. Nora turned toward him, and the answer came out half a beat before she had organized it. Rachel works compliance for county health facilities. Mark's expression shifted from concern to calculation. He had never practiced law, but after 19 years of marriage to one ugly divorce from the same, he understood the look a person got when disparate pieces suddenly clicked in ways that threatened to make everything worse. Connected how? He asked. I don't know yet. That was true, and not enough. She leaned against the wall beneath one of the watercolor prints. Some vague riverbank in gentle colors no actual hospital visitor had ever emotionally required. Halverson has pending approvals tied to clinic-adjacent redevelopment and long-term care parcels. County Health reviewed infrastructure impact and compliance on at least 2 of those sites. If Rachel's department touched any of it, even peripherally, and if the exhibits I copied include procurement correspondence or internal routing lists, then your stolen files could overlap with her work. Mark finished it for her, voice flat. Nora nodded. Maybe. Or maybe Ben heard one word, and my brain is doing what it always does, building the worst possible architecture. Your brain doesn't build the worst possible architecture, Mark said. It builds the full structure and then moves into it before inspection. Under different circumstances, she might have smiled. Instead, she felt the remark lodge somewhere tender because it was so thoroughly him, critical without cruelty, observant enough to wound because he had once paid loving attention. I should go home, she said. You should sleep, Mark replied. That wasn't what I said. I know. He glanced toward the ICU doors. If you stay here much longer, you're either going to say something to the wrong person, have a panic attack in public, or convince yourself you can still control the next 12 hours by remaining physically near the damage. Nora looked at him sharply. Do you rehearse these diagnoses? No. He rubbed at the stubble on his jaw. I just know you. That sat between them for a second, carrying more history than either could safely unpack in a waiting room at dawn. Mark cleared his throat. Come back to my place. Shower. Change clothes. Check on Owen, if he'll look at you. Nora's body responded to the offer before her pride could. Warm water, clean shirt, a familiar kitchen not arranged by law enforcement or triage. But the thought of entering Mark's house now felt almost indecent, like bringing soot into a room where the furniture still remembered their old marriage in the grain. I can't, she said. Why? Because I don't know whether the police are going to charge me this morning. Because Daniel is probably already spinning this for the firm. Because if Owen sees me right now, he'll either hate me or pity me. And I genuinely don't know which one I can survive less. Mark watched her long enough that she had to look away first. Those are all terrible reasons, he said. They're still my reasons. He nodded once, the way people do when giving up on persuasion, not because they agree, but because they recognize timing as sovereign. Then at least let me drive you home. Daniel sent a car. Daniel can survive the emotional blow of losing a receipt. Nora almost said no again out of reflex. That old divorced choreography of refusing help because accepting it might imply debt. Instead, she let the fight go. The energy required to maintain distance suddenly seemed absurdly expensive. Okay, she said. They walked through the hospital together in silence, past a chapel, with the door cracked open and one votive candle flickering beside a laminated sign about interfaith privacy. Past the cafeteria gates pulled halfway down, behind which a woman in a hairnet refilled a condiment station with methodical indifference. Past an environmental services cart with fresh linens stacked in clean white columns that made Nora think briefly, irrationally, of surrender flags. Outside, the air had changed. Dawn was not bright yet, but the black had thinned into a blue-gray wash over the parking lot, and the wet asphalt reflected everything with exhausted clarity. The storm had finally moved east. A few drops still fell from the hospital awning in steady intervals. Mark unlocked his car, an aging Subaru that smelled faintly of coffee beans, dog hair, and the cedar air freshener he always forgot to replace on time. Nora slid into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut on the chilly morning. The interior felt so ordinary, it almost undid her. Crumbs in the center console. A folded soccer camp brochure Owen had never used. Receipts stuck in the cup holder. Evidence of a life continuing in low-stakes mess. Mark started the engine. NPR came on at low volume, with a soft-voiced host discussing agricultural water allocations. He turned it off immediately. Thanks, Nora murmured. I wasn't doing it for you, he said. I just can't hear public radio before 6 without wanting to drive into a retaining wall. She breathed out something close to a laugh. The city looked rinsed and newly incriminated under first light. Strip malls with neon signs still buzzing from the night shift. A donut shop opening its front shutters. A man power-walking in expensive athletic wear, as if personal discipline existed outside weather and tragedy. At a red light, Nora saw a school crossing sign and had to look away. The image of Lily in the headlights returned with such immediacy she pressed her nails into her palm until sensation replaced memory. Mark noticed but did not comment. He took the freeway for 2 exits, then cut through a quieter residential grid lined with sycamores and ranch houses where sprinklers had not yet started. "What happens now?" he asked finally. Nora knew he meant legally, practically, narratively, all at once. Collision investigators process the scene. They'll pull event data from the SUV, phone records, probably seek a warrant for contents. The DA reviews once medical status is clearer. So, charges depend on whether the mother dies. Partly. Also, severity of Lily's injuries. Distracted driving causing great bodily injury is already enough to ruin a person. Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. And the documents? If the patrol officer logged the folder properly, it gets impounded with vehicle property or turned over as potential evidence if they think it's relevant. Once the firm learns exactly where it landed, Daniel will try to claw it back under privilege. Can he? Maybe. Privilege isn't magic, but it's strong, and institutions protect themselves with stronger hands than individuals do. She stared through the windshield. The problem is, if there's criminal exposure tied to how I obtained it, privilege will become the least interesting part. Mark absorbed that. And if Rachel's work overlaps? Nora closed her eyes briefly. Then every motive I had gets dirtier in public. It won't matter whether I intended to expose corruption. It'll look like I was spiraling through a private crusade so consuming I couldn't keep an innocent family out of its path. "Were you?" He asked it gently, which made it more dangerous. Nora turned toward him. The answer she wanted was no. The honest answer required excavation. She thought about the past 8 months. Late nights at the office after the rest of the firm had gone home, reading deposition binders while eating stale almonds from the reception desk. The first anomalous invoice code, linking Halverson Development to a Shell consulting firm. The way her pulse had changed when she realized the Shell's registered agent matched the brother-in-law of a zoning inspector. Daniel's measured disinterest when she raised concerns. The subtle reassignment of tasks, the quiet suggestion that she keep her work product narrow. The dawning understanding that good lawyers at powerful firms were not paid to discover rot so much as to rout around odor. Then she thought about home. Owen slamming doors. Mark texting from across town about therapy appointments and SAT deadlines and broken curfews. Her own apartment silent after midnight, except for the hum of the refrigerator, and the little buzz in her mind that only disappeared when she was pursuing some external wrong, with enough complexity to drown out internal ones. "Yes," she said at last, because anything else would be self-fiction. At least partly. I was making it my whole life. Maybe because parts of my actual life felt unsalvageable. Mark nodded, eyes on the road. He did not weaponize the admission, which somehow felt like a greater rebuke than if he had. "That sounds expensive," he said. "It was. Is." He corrected her without heat. Nora looked out the side window at a mother in yoga pants buckling a toddler into a car seat in a driveway, both of them moving with sleepy domestic inefficiency. It hurt in a way she had no right to resent. By the time they reached her apartment building, the sky had lifted into a pale, washed blue. The complex was one of those renovated mid-range places that wanted to be called luxury because they had painted the exterior charcoal and installed package lockers. Young ficus trees lined the parking area. The fountain in the center courtyard was off, probably because management still had not fixed the pump. Nora unbuckled but did not open the door. "Will you call me when you hear from the hospital?" Mark asked. "If they tell me anything. And Owen? I don't know what to say to him." Mark rested one hand on the steering wheel and studied her profile. "Try the truth before your instincts get there first." She turned. Meaning? Don't explain your principles, your stress, the corruption, the system. Start with, "I hurt people and I'm scared." He may still slam a door, but at least he'll hear a person. Nora sat with that. It sounded almost embarrassingly simple, which was usually how truth arrived, once enough sophistication had exhausted itself. "Okay," she said. Mark leaned back. "I'm going home for an hour before work. Try to sleep." And Nora, "What?" "Whatever Daniel says, don't let him convince you that survival and honesty are the same strategy. Sometimes they aren't. Pick with your eyes open." She nodded. Then she got out and walked toward the building, every step making the dried smoke in her clothes crackle invisibly around her. In the elevator mirror, she barely recognized herself. Hair tangled, skin gray beneath the bruise, eyes overbright with exhaustion and cortisol. She looked like every woman who had held it together too long and mistaken endurance for control. Inside the apartment, the silence hit first. Then the faint citrus scent of the hand soap by the sink. Then the little details she had stopped seeing because familiarity blurred them. A bowl of unopened mail on the counter. One coffee cup with yesterday's lipstick print dried at the rim. Owen's old state championship swim photo still magnet clipped to the fridge, despite his insistence last year that it was creepy divorced parent museum behavior. The throw blanket folded over the couch arm with geometric precision, because Nora had not let another adult inhabit the space long enough to disturb it. She locked the door and set her keys down carefully, as if any abrupt motion might crack whatever was left of her composure. Then she went straight to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and sat on the closed toilet, while it heated, because she lacked the energy to undress, and also lacked the will to stand in the apartment smelling like a fire she had not fully escaped. Steam began to fog the mirror. She unbuttoned the blazer with stiff fingers, peeled off the blouse that still smelled like smoke and rain and adrenaline, and froze when she saw the dark bruise crossing her shoulder where the seatbelt had caught her. It looked almost theatrical, a prop mark from a role she had not auditioned for. In the shower, the hot water hurt first, then soothed. Soot streaked down in gray ribbons around her feet. She scrubbed harder than necessary at her hairline and wrists, as if negligence could be made to lift from skin by friction. Under the water, her mind became louder, not quieter. Rachel alive but critical. Lily waiting for surgery. Eli breathing. Ben's face when he said, "If Rachel dies, I will hate you." Daniel's controlled anger. The folder tipping open on the tow truck. Rachel in compliance. Owen asleep drunk in a parking lot, while Nora drove toward someone else's disaster and made herself one. She pressed both hands to the tile wall and let the water strike the back of her neck until her breathing slowed. Then she cried, not elegantly, not in cathartic waves, but in abrupt involuntary bursts that folded her over at the waist and left her coughing. She cried for Lily's sneaker in the grass, for Rachel's cut-open scrub top, for Owen at 8 with hallway light under his bedroom door, for the version of herself that had once believed being useful in a crisis could offset the harm of becoming one. When the water cooled, she shut it off and stood dripping in the small white-tiled room, listening to the apartment's quiet plumbing clicks. On the counter, her laptop sat closed beside a stack of case notes. She stared at it while toweling off. Daniel would expect her to stay off email, to wait for counsel, to let the firm manage contact, narrative, damage. Every trained instinct told her that was correct. Another instinct, older or maybe just less professional, kept returning to Ben's remark about Rachel's work. If Rachel had touched any compliance trail related to Halverson's projects, then the documents in police custody might no longer be just the firm's problem or Nora's. They might expose a chain of ignored warnings stretching into health infrastructure and county approvals. Or that could be exhaustion, inventing meaning where only adjacency existed. She could not tell. That uncertainty gnawed at her harder than the physical pain. Dressed in sweatpants and an old UC Davis t-shirt, hair wrapped in a towel, she carried a mug of reheated coffee to the couch and opened the laptop anyway. Not to email, not yet, just to look. The local drive still held the notes she had made from memory before copying the exhibits. Careful little breadcrumbs she had told herself were for orientation, not theft. She opened the folder. Spreadsheets, meeting dates, invoice anomalies, parcel references. A list of county departments copied from a routing sheet. She scanned too fast at first, eyes snagging and slipping. Then one acronym stopped her. CHFD Compliance Review. North Valley Transitional Care Access Corridor. She sat straighter. Opened the memo. Read. Halverson parcel linked to roadway narrowing near a planned urgent care annex. Fire lane deviation concerns raised and marked pending. Follow-up delayed. Another line item. Secondary reviewer. R. Bennett. Nora stared until the letters lost shape and became only fact. Not proof of some giant invisible design. Not destiny. Worse than that. Because it was banal. Rachel had likely reviewed paperwork on the same project whose buried irregularities Nora had become obsessed with. Maybe she had flagged something. Maybe she had never gotten a response. Maybe the woman now lying intubated upstairs at Mercy had spent an ordinary Tuesday typing cautious compliance language about emergency access setbacks, while her children ate cereal before school, never imagining a different kind of emergency would someday bring the same lawyer and the same project crashing into her lawn. Nora set the mug down too hard, and coffee sloshed over the rim onto the table. She barely noticed. The room felt suddenly airless. This was no longer just about exposing corruption in the abstract. It was braided now with a family whose suffering she had physically entered. The knowledge did not clarify what to do. It made every option morally radioactive. If she buried it, then Rachel's professional warning might stay buried too. If she surfaced it, it would happen while Ben's family was still measuring survival by hourly updates from ICU and surgery. Truth would arrive as another form of invasion. Nora closed the laptop but kept her hands resting on it. Outside her apartment window, The complex was waking up. A delivery truck beeped in reverse. Someone's small dog barked with outraged persistence. A leaf blower started in the courtyard, because America believed no morning was too ruined for maintenance noise. The ordinary world was resuming its shift. Nora sat very still in the middle of it, the damp towel cooling around her shoulders, and understood with a kind of exhausted precision that the next choice she made would not save the Bennetts, would not save Owen, and would not save her career in any pure sense. At best, it would decide which fracture line widened first. Nora reached for her phone before remembering again that it was in police custody, and the empty motion irritated her so sharply that she almost laughed. The body was humiliating that way. Even after disaster, it kept trying old habits before memory caught up. She pulled the towel off her hair, draped it over the couch arm, and went back to the kitchen for paper towels to blot the coffee ring from the table. Her movements felt absurdly careful, the kind people used around sleeping infants or unstable glass, as if one quick gesture might tip the whole apartment into a second crisis. She wiped the table, rinsed the mug, filled it again, then stood at the sink, staring out at the courtyard through the narrow strip of window above the counter. Two maintenance men in green uniforms were arguing near the fountain pump with the flat, practical annoyance of people whose emergencies never made the news. One gestured with a wrench, the other shrugged, glanced at his watch, and bent to lift a plastic panel. Life, proceeding by checklist. Nora envied them so intensely it startled her. Not their jobs exactly, the scale. The mercy of only needing to solve what was in front of you. Her laptop sat waiting on the coffee table like a witness who had decided to stay seated until called. She walked back, lowered herself onto the couch, and reopened the file. This time, she forced herself to go slowly. The memo referencing Rachel Bennett was 3 pages of cautious bureaucratic prose, exactly the kind of document designed to prevent urgency from looking emotional. Roadway narrowing could impede emergency vehicle access. Proposed turn radius near the North Valley Transitional Care Parcel did not meet preferred clearance. Secondary concerns included service lane visibility during peak evening traffic. Recommend additional review before final zoning sign-off. Secondary reviewer, R. Bennett. Date stamp 6 weeks earlier. Follow-up. Deferred pending amended site plans. Nora leaned closer until she could see pixel edges on the letters. Deferred. Pending. The favorite hiding place of American negligence was not a dark alley or a cash envelope. It was a calendar. It was the polite administrative verb that moved danger 3 inches to the right and called it process. She knew that. She had built half her career, translating those verbs into arguments no jury would ever hear, because settlement always came first. Her chest tightened again, though not with the raw panic of the night. This was cleaner, colder. Rachel had seen a risk. Maybe not the same risk. Not this house, not this family. Still, something had been identified and slowed into paperwork. Meanwhile, Halverson kept moving. Daniel kept smoothing. County people kept keeping their jobs. And Nora, in trying to break that machinery, had driven straight through a child. She shut the laptop and set both hands flat on the lid until the trembling in her fingers passed. Then she did the thing Mark had told her to do, or tried to. She called Owen from the apartment landline, the number he still sometimes picked up, because nobody his age expected anything good from a landline, and therefore occasionally answered out of curiosity. It rang 6 times. Voicemail. She hung up before the tone. She tried again 10 minutes later. This time he answered on the 4th ring with a single irritated, "What?" Nora's throat closed so fast she had to pull the receiver away for half a second. She had prepared a sentence on the walk from the couch to the phone. It disintegrated immediately. "It's me," she said, and hated how unnecessary that sounded. No kidding. His voice had the thick, flattened edge of too little sleep and too much teenage contempt marshaled too early in the day. Somewhere behind him she could hear a cabinet door closing at Mark's house. Then silence again. He had moved to a room with a door. That alone told her he expected a fight. "Dad said you're okay," she began. "Physically." Wow. Really starting strong. Nora shut her eyes. "Try the truth before your instincts get there first." "I hurt people last night," she said. The line went silent. Not disconnected. Just silent in that alarming way that meant he was suddenly listening despite himself. She kept going before she lost nerve. "I was driving, and I looked at my phone, and I hit a girl. There was also a fire at her house. I got her brother out. Their mother is in the ICU. I'm scared, and I don't know what happens next." On the other end, she heard his breathing change. Teenagers hated rawness when they weren't prepared for it. It demanded adulthood from them. "Dad already told me," he said. But the sarcasm had thinned. Not like that, apparently. Another pause. Then smaller. "Did the mom die?" "No. She's alive. But she's critical. Owen exhaled hard through his nose. She could picture him doing it, sitting on the edge of the guest bed in Mark's office, because he refused to call it his room. Shoulders rounded, one hand dragging through hair he had stopped letting her comment on a year ago. Jesus. Yeah. Were you drunk? No. Then why were you looking at your phone? There was the child question inside the almost man voice. Not legal, not strategic. The primitive need for why to line up with damage. Nora looked at the framed swim photo on the fridge from across the room. Owen, at 14 on the medal podium, wet hair slicked down, smile both startled and proud. Because your dad texted that you were missing, she said, and because work was calling, and because I made bad choices before the crash happened, not just when it did. He was quiet again. So, this is partly my fault. The word struck so hard she stood up without meaning to, the phone cord pulling taut across the kitchen tile. No. Her voice came out sharp enough to startle them both. She forced it down. No, absolutely not. You do not get to carry that for me. You just said, I said I chose wrong because I was scared and distracted. That belongs to me. He let out a humorless little laugh. That's convenient. Pain flashed through her so quickly it almost became anger. Not at him, at the terrible accuracy of adolescence. How it could locate hypocrisy without having the gentleness to name nuance. Maybe it is, she said, but it's still true. He didn't answer. She heard him shift, maybe sit down harder, maybe lean against a wall. Are you going to jail? He asked finally, and there it was under everything. Not morality, not ideology, fear of losing the person you'd spent 2 years trying not to need. Nora gripped the edge of the counter. I don't know. Cool. He said it like acid over a cut. Really cool. Owen, don't. His voice cracked on the word, then came back angrier to cover it. Don't do that thing where you say my name like it fixes anything, he inhaled raggedly. You always have some bigger thing, some case, some problem, some emergency, some reason you're not actually in the room. And now you hit a kid because of your phone and somehow I'm supposed to hear that as mature honesty? Nora let him. Each sentence landed where it belonged because she had built the target herself over years. You're right, she said, when he stopped. About a lot of that. That's not better. I know. Stop saying that. She pressed her lips together until she trusted them. Okay. He sounded suddenly younger again when he spoke next. Did she look at you? Who? The girl. Nora swallowed. Rain in the headlights. Yellow hoodie. Open eyes in the grass. Yes. Was she crying? Not at first. The silence stretched. Then, I keep thinking about that. I know you are. He made a frustrated sound. There you go again. I'm sorry. The phrase hung between them, worn thin by adult overuse, and yet still the only clean instrument for certain jobs. On the other end, she heard a door open softly. Mark checking without interrupting, then shut again. Owen said, very quietly now, I stole the car because I wanted you to freak out. Nora sat back down. The confession altered the air. Okay, and then Dad did, and then you. He couldn't finish it. He didn't need to. The unfinished sentence was worse than blame because it turned intention into consequence without melodrama. A 17-year-old wanted reaction and got catastrophe at a stranger's house. You didn't cause this, Nora said. I know that in my head, he muttered. The rest of me's still catching up. She closed her eyes. Mine too. They stayed on the line breathing for a few seconds. Not peace, just shared occupancy of damage. Finally, Owen said, I don't want to see you today. The honesty of it hurt and steadied her at once. Okay, but text Dad if you hear whether the mom's okay. I don't have my phone. Police took it. Right. A beat. Of course they did. She almost told him to be safe, to drink water, to sleep. All the little mother scripts that rose automatically when there was nothing adequate to say. She let them go. I love you, she said instead. He did not say it back. He didn't hang up either. After 2 long breaths, he said, Bye, Mom. And the line clicked dead. Nora stood holding the receiver long after the dial tone began. When she finally set it down, the apartment felt both emptier and more honest than before. She went back to the couch, opened the laptop again, and copied the memo reference numbers and routing chain onto a yellow legal pad by hand. The tactile act steadied her, pen scratching paper, ink making decisions visible. She added the related parcel IDs from the spreadsheet, then stared at the page. There were 2 obvious paths, both bad. First, tell Daniel everything, including Rachel's role. Let the firm mount privilege protections and crisis containment. Watch the core issue disappear into process, while Nora's criminal and civil exposure took center stage. Second, Contact someone outside the firm with the memo trail before the folder vanished into sealed procedure, ensuring the compliance issue survived even if she didn't. That second path might also deepen Ben's rage, invite accusations that she was exploiting his family's trauma to cover herself, and shred what little chance remained of controlling the criminal case. She could hear Daniel already. Martyrdom is still ego when timed conveniently. She could hear Mark too. Pick with your eyes open. The legal pad blurred. Nora rubbed at the bridge of her nose. Her apartment clock read 8:17 a.m. Courts would be opening. Reporters would be waking. Insurance adjusters would already be exchanging claim numbers with the brisk cheerfulness of people monetizing catastrophe before first coffee. Somewhere in a hospital room, Lily was being prepped for surgery. Somewhere upstairs from her, Rachel's lungs were being asked to do what smoke had interrupted. Somewhere in police property, Nora's phone and the folder sat under fluorescent lights waiting for someone else's procedural curiosity. She needed counsel, not tied to the firm. She knew that. Daniel was corporate shelter, not moral weather. She pulled open the junk drawer, found an old contacts notebook from before she had started trusting digital storage with every relationship, and flipped through pages until she found the number for Elena Ruiz, a defense attorney she had once opposed in a whistleblower retaliation case. Elena had lost on damages, and won on nearly everything that mattered. Nora had respected her in the dangerous way professionals sometimes do, recognizing a person who would rather fracture a room than flatter it. The number might be outdated. Nora dialed anyway from the landline. Elena answered on the third ring, sounding as if she had already been awake an hour and hated half the people she'd spoken to. Ruiz. It's Nora Whitaker. A pause. That's a name I didn't expect before 9 a.m. I need counsel. Another pause, shorter. Then Elena's whole tone changed, not softer but more exact. Are you safe enough to talk for 30 seconds on this line? Nora thought of the landline, the empty apartment, the absurdity of answering as if any meaningful layer of safety remained. Yes. Criminal. Possibly. Vehicle collision with serious injury. Phone seizure. Also possible document issue tied to my firm and a county development matter. Jesus. Elena let out a slow breath. You do know how to schedule a morning. Can you meet? I can be there in 45. Don't call anyone else unless it's medical family. Don't email. Don't upload. Don't become principled on the internet. Understood. Do you? Mostly. Bad answer. But there was the faintest trace of grim humor in it. Text me your address from another line if you can. Actually, no, don't. Stay put. I know where you live from the old case file. That is unsettling. Get unsettled later. She hung up. Nora set the receiver down and felt, for the first time since the mailbox splintered, a thin, functional line reappear inside her. Not hope. Infrastructure. Sometimes that was enough to keep a person upright. She used the next 40 minutes badly. She made coffee and forgot to drink it. She changed the living room lamp bulb because it had started flickering last week and she could not stand one more unstable signal in the room. She folded laundry from a chair back because movement without thinking felt medicinal. Twice, she opened the laptop intending to close the documents folder, and twice ended up rereading the memo references instead. At 8:49, the apartment buzzer sounded. Elena Ruiz came in wearing a navy blazer over jeans and carrying a leather messenger bag swollen with files she probably didn't need but preferred to have like armor. She was in her late 40s, compact, dark-eyed, with a face that made people confess things just to get ahead of being dissected. She took one look at Nora and said, "You've showered. Good. You still look terrible. Thank you. Don't thank me. It wastes time." Elena set the bag on the dining table, took out a yellow pad, and motioned Nora into the chair opposite hers. Start at the crash, then the documents, then the firm. Chronological. No speeches. Nora told it. Every ugly, useful part. Looking at the phone. Lily. The fire. Eli. Police. Daniel. The seized folder. Rachel Bennett's compliance memo. Owen. Elena wrote in neat, brutal shorthand and interrupted only to pin down sequence, names, timestamps, and what exactly Nora had said after Miranda. When Nora finished, the apartment seemed smaller, as if narrative itself had occupied air volume. Elena leaned back. "All right," she said. "The collision case is bad, but not yet the worst version of bad. The document issue could either remain a side fire or become the accelerant. Your firm is not your friend. Daniel is especially not your friend. And the Bennett overlap changes optics, not underlying truth." "I know." Elena gave her a look. "Then stop saying it and start using it." She tapped the yellow pad. Question 1. Why did someone text you before police advised counsel? Nora felt the blood leave her face a second time. In the flood of everything else, The anonymous messages had receded to the edges. Now they stepped back into the center. I don't know. Read me the exact language. Nora did. Elena's pen stopped moving. That's not random, she said. That's informed. Somebody knew both that you were with police and that you had pre-existing exposure. Daniel? Maybe. But Daniel would call or send someone deniable from the firm, not text like a parking garage extortionist. Anyone else know you copied the exhibits? Nora thought. Daniel suspected. No one had direct confirmation. Unless, there's a litigation support manager, she said slowly. Tessa Ling. She questioned an access log 2 days ago. Could be her. Could be someone watching the file. Could be someone trying to keep you quiet for reasons unrelated to saving you. Elena closed the pad. From this moment on, assume your accident, your documents, and that family's project history are not separate conversations. Nora sat very still. Outside, the leaf blower had moved farther down the courtyard, the sound fading and returning between buildings like a mechanical tide. What do I do? She asked. Elena met her eyes. First, we keep you from helping the state or your firm destroy you by instinct. Then we decide whether truth is something we can place strategically before it gets placed on top of you. Nora looked past her toward the dark laptop screen reflecting both their faces. And the Bennetts? Elena's expression did not soften, but something in it acknowledged the real question beneath the legal one. You do not get to make this right. You may get a chance to make one part of it less false. The buzzer sounded again before Nora could answer. Both women turned toward the door at once. Elena stood first, one hand already on her bag, the other lifted slightly to keep Nora seated. The buzzer sounded a second time, longer now, impatient. Then a fist hit the door itself. Hard. Then a fist hit the door itself. Hard. Nora's whole body reacted before her mind did. Not dramatic fear, not a scream or flinch, just that fast internal lock when nerves chose readiness without waiting for interpretation. Elena crossed the small living room in 3 efficient steps and looked through the peephole without touching the latch. Her shoulders changed first. A subtle drop, not into relaxation but recognition. It's Ben Bennett, she said quietly. Nora stood so fast the dining chair legs scraped the floor. What? Stay where you are. Elena kept one hand near the lock and turned her head just enough to look back. Do not speak first. Do not apologize unless I signal you. And if he came here straight from the hospital, then whatever this is, it cost him something to arrive carrying it. The fist hit the door again, though weaker this time, less rage than exhaustion, refusing to become polite. Nora moved anyway, stopping 3 feet behind Elena like distance itself might count as discipline. Up close, the apartment suddenly seemed embarrassingly personal. The blanket on the couch, the legal pad on the table, Owen's photo on the fridge visible from the entry if the angle was right. This was not neutral ground. It was her life, small and curated and inadequate, about to receive a man whose family had been torn open partly by her hand. Elena opened the door but kept her body in the frame. Ben stood there in the same borrowed hospital scrubs, wrinkled now, with an old zip hoodie thrown over them and left open like he had forgotten it midway. His hair looked damp again, not from rain but from somebody repeatedly dragging wet hands through it. He had not slept. He had the particular gray-pink skin tone of people living on vending machine coffee, bad hallway air, and fear. His eyes flicked to Nora over Elena's shoulder and stayed there. I need to talk to her, he said. Elena answered before Nora could breathe. I'm her attorney. You can tell me what you need. Ben's jaw tightened. I'm not here to threaten her. That's useful, because if you were, you'd be leaving. He stared at Elena for half a second, recalibrating, then looked back at Nora. Rachel woke up for maybe 3 minutes. The room changed temperature around the sentence. Nora felt it. Elena felt it. Ben swallowed once and kept going. Not fully. Sedation, tubes, confusion. But she woke up enough to hear me when I said the kids were alive. His voice shook on the last word and he hated that it did. Then she kept trying to say something. Nurse thought she was asking for Lily. She wasn't. He reached into the pocket of the hoodie and pulled out a folded hospital notepad sheet, damp from being gripped too long. She wrote this. He held it out. Elena took it first, unfolded it, read, then passed it to Nora. The handwriting was jagged, broken by weakness, and whatever medication still flooded Rachel's system. Only 6 words, all capitalized because precision collapses under sedation. Check North Valley. Fire access file. Nora stared at the page until the edges of the letters blurred. Ben watched her face closely enough to catch recognition before she could hide it. You know what it means, he said. It wasn't a question. Nora lifted her eyes to his. I know the project name. Rachel worked that file. His breathing had started to speed up, and he was making visible efforts to keep it even. When the police mentioned papers from your car, and then one of the ICU nurses said Rachel was trying to write North Valley before they sedated her again, I went to her locker. Elena stiffened. You accessed hospital property? Her locker, yes. I'm her husband. That is not automatically a legal concept. Ben ignored her. There was a copy envelope in her bag. Not official, not logged out. Home printouts, memos, email chains. She'd been keeping her own record because somebody told her to sign off on the amended access plan, even though the fire lane measurements still didn't meet emergency clearance. Nora felt the floor beneath the apartment, all concrete and framing, and neighboring units and management paint, as if she could suddenly sense the fraudulence of every finished surface in the city. Ben continued, voice roughening. She wouldn't tell me details. She just kept saying it was county politics, and she didn't want it following us home. Last week we fought about it because she missed Lily's orchestra thing over some late compliance review, and I said, it's a parking lane, Rachel. Nobody dies over a parking lane. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that moment he looked less angry than wrecked by the precision of his own memory. Turns out that's not how any of this works. Nora held the note in both hands because she no longer trusted one. Why are you here? She asked. The words sounded almost cruel, but there was no gentler way to ask a man why he had carried fresh ICU air and old rage into the apartment of the woman who hit his child. Ben opened the hoodie slightly and pulled out a second item, a manila folder bent at one corner. He held it, not offering it yet, because if Rachel thought of this before she thought of me, then whatever is in here scared her more than being liked. He looked at Elena, and because by the time county council or her supervisors hear she's awake, that locker gets cleaned out, whatever procedure says. Elena took one step closer. So you stole documents. Ben's mouth twitched with a bleak humor that had no joy in it. Apparently I'm trying something new. Nora nearly laughed, and the fact that she nearly laughed while standing across from him made her feel briefly monstrous. But the line also cracked something rigid between them. Not forgiveness. Recognition, maybe. That institutions had finally pressed both of them past the respectable version of themselves. Elena held out her hand. Let me see the folder. Ben kept it where it was. No. Then I can't advise you. I didn't come for advice. He looked at Nora again. I came because if she's already blown up both our lives, I'd like it to be for the truth and not just for paperwork. Elena made a short sound through her nose, part annoyance, part acknowledgement. That sentence alone is enough reason you need counsel. Ben shifted his weight. Only then did Nora notice the faint tremor in one knee, the bodily mutiny of a person far beyond rest. Lily's in surgery, he said. Eli's asleep on a cot, because a social worker convinced me that children are not emotionally regulated by ICU hallways. Rachel might wake up again, or she might not today. And I am standing in your apartment because my wife, who should hate you on principle if she's hearing the story right, used the little bit of consciousness she had to point at a county file. He took one breath. So either I'm delusional from not sleeping, or whatever this project is matters enough to step over the rest for 5 minutes. Nora's thoughts came too fast and too layered. Rachel in ICU, fingers barely gripping a pen, choosing those 6 words over all the other words available to a woman whose children had nearly died. Daniel. The seized folder. The memo on Nora's laptop. The fire access file. A roadway clearance concern near a medical corridor. The 1,000 ordinary ways danger got value engineered into acceptable risk. She looked at Elena. If you take it, Elena cut in. You increase exposure on possession and intent. If you don't, you may be watching relevant evidence disappear while the state and your firm sort out which version of you is easiest to prosecute. She did not sugarcoat any of it. There is no clean lane. Ben gave a hollow laugh. That theme does seem to be holding. Nora stared at the manila folder. It had a coffee stain on the flap, one metal clasp half bent. Rachel's life reduced, for the moment, to paper bulging with objections somebody might already be trying to erase. In another life, Nora would have insisted on warrants and chain of custody and not touching anything until procedure caught up. In this life, procedure was one of the active threats. She made the decision the way people often made the worst necessary ones. Not because certainty arrived, but because delay started to smell like complicity. Come in, she said. Elena swore softly under her breath, then stepped aside because opposing it now would only move the conversation into the hallway, where neighbors could listen through peepholes and later misremember every word. Ben entered without really seeing the apartment. He placed the folder on the dining table as if laying down something fragile and radioactive at once. Up close, Nora could see soot beneath one of his fingernails, and a hospital visitor sticker still stuck crooked on his hoodie zipper. Elena closed the door, locked it, and immediately took control of the room. Phones off if you have them. Window shades closed. Nobody touches anything until I see what we're talking about. Ben handed over his phone without argument and set it face down on the counter. Elena closed the blinds. The apartment dimmed into late morning shadow cut by slats of light. Nora sat. Ben remained standing for a beat, then sat too, heavily, as if the bones in his legs had finally submitted their complaint. Elena put on reading glasses from her bag, opened the folder carefully, and started sorting. Print emails, site maps, internal comments, county compliance routing slips, a redlined access diagram. Rachel had been meticulous. Tabs, sticky notes, highlighted measurements. One email chain caught Nora's eye immediately because Daniel Kessler's name appeared 3 lines down. She felt a hot pulse behind her eyes. There, she said. Elena slid the page over. The chain was between Halverson's outside counsel, county planning, a deputy director in health facilities, and Daniel, copied as liaison for development compliance harmonization, whatever euphemistic hell that was supposed to mean. Rachel had written, in the middle of the thread, that the amended plan still left emergency access non-compliant during peak use hours, and that sign-off should not proceed without independent fire review. Above her message, a deputy director had replied, "We are under pressure to keep this corridor package moving. Please resolve remaining concerns offline." Daniel's contribution came later, and was exactly the sort of sentence Nora had spent years helping men like him perfect. "We believe further delay may create public service bottlenecks disproportionate to the technical issues identified." In other words, smooth it over. Ben leaned forward, reading over the edge of the table. "That's her," he said, tapping Rachel's line with a shaking finger but not touching the paper itself. "That wording. Should not proceed. That's how she talks when she's trying not to sound angry in email." Nora read further. Attached notes referenced a fire consultant, retained by Halverson, whose review contradicted Rachel's measurements. Another internal memo from Rachel documented that the consultant's site visit omitted evening traffic simulation. Another note, handwritten in the margin of a printout, simply said, "They want signature, not review." Nora pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. Ben watched her do it, and something dark crossed his face. "You see it now," he said. "Yes, then say it." The demand was not rhetorical. It was grief asking for a witness. Nora lowered her hand. "Your wife flagged a safety issue connected to the North Valley Access Plan. People above her, including my firm's client side, were trying to push it through, and there are signs the review process was manipulated." Ben nodded once, too sharply, and Rachel knew. Yes. Elena kept reading, expression unreadable, except for a slight narrowing around the eyes that meant the material was as bad as she had expected, or worse. "This is strong," she said. "Not final proof strong, but enough to survive first contact if placed correctly." She looked at Nora. "The question is where?" Nora's pulse kicked harder. Here was the narrowing, the story approaching its hinge, within the ending window now. Whether she liked the phrase or not, and the decision could not keep pretending it was future tense. She thought of Daniel urging survival, Mark warning that survival and honesty were not the same strategy, Owen saying you always have some bigger thing, Ben saying Rachel chose a file before she chose him because she knew how systems worked. She looked at the laptop on the coffee table, then the folder, then at Ben, whose daughter was under anesthesia while he sat in the apartment of the woman who had changed his life with a glance downward. "If this goes public today," Nora said, "it will get framed as me creating cover. Using your family, using the crash, using Rachel's condition, all of it." Ben's gaze did not soften. "That may be true and still not be the whole truth." She nodded slowly. "If it stays inside channels, it gets buried." Elena interlaced her fingers. "Not necessarily, but likely, yes. Especially if county council and your firm coordinate privilege and personnel shields before an outside record exists." Ben looked between them. "I don't care about elegant. I care about irreversible." That word settled heavily. Irreversible. Fire, bone fractures, ICU intubation, phone seizure. Once something crossed a threshold, nobody got to pretend it had not. Nora felt suddenly very tired and very clear at the same time. The kind of clarity that comes, not from certainty of outcome, but from recognition that all remaining options are forms of loss, and you are finally choosing shape, not safety. "I know a reporter," she said. Elena immediately held up a hand. "No direct call from you. Absolutely not." "Then from you." "Maybe," Elena considered. "Or we give it to an inspector general contact with timed media hold." Ben's face tightened. Timed means delay. Timed means survivable for the criminal case. Survivable for who? He shot back. Elena did not blink. At this table, everyone. Nora stared at Rachel's handwritten note again. Check North Valley Fire access file. Not expose Halverson. Not destroy county planning. Not save me. Check the file. A narrower moral instruction. Maybe that mattered. Maybe Rachel, even sedated, had not been asking for a bomb, only for witness. Nora looked up. We do both, she said. Elena frowned. Define both. You send the core packet immediately to an inspector general contact and to county fire oversight. Not through the firm, not through planning, with confirmation of receipt. At the same time, you send a limited preservation notice to county council and Daniel that specific North Valley materials exist and that destruction or alteration will create spoliation exposure. Elena's eyes sharpened. And media? Held until receipt is confirmed, and Lily is out of surgery. Ben opened his mouth. Maybe to object, maybe to bargain against delay. But Nora kept going because if she stopped now, she might never finish the thought. Not for optics. For the children. They deserve one thing today, not detonating in real time over their heads if it can wait 2 hours. Ben's face changed very slightly at that. Some private calculation involving hallways and family and exhaustion. Elena leaned back. That is not the safest plan for you. No. It may still get painted as self-serving. Yes. It may provoke your firm into cutting you loose before noon. They were going to do that anyway. Elena held Nora's gaze, testing whether this was guilt speaking or judgment. Whatever she saw, she accepted. All right, she said. Then we do it clean. Minimal commentary. Maximum documentation. Ben let out a breath that sounded like part surrender, part grief, leaving room for function. He sank back in the chair and covered his eyes with one hand. Not crying, just briefly disappearing from view. Nora watched him and understood that this, not absolution, was all she was going to get from the day. Temporary alignment with the man she had most reason to lose forever. Elena opened her laptop, pulled a portable scanner from her bag like a magician, producing the least magical but most necessary object in the world, and began feeding pages through. The machine whirred softly on the table. Ben lowered his hand and stared at the wall. Nora sat with Rachel's note in front of her and listened to the scanner, the building pipes, a neighbor's muffled footsteps overhead, the ordinary American noises surrounding the quiet manufacture of a record that might outlive all of them in ways none of them wanted. After the scans were complete, Elena typed with brutal speed, building distribution lists, attaching only what was essential, stripping adjectives from urgency until the facts had nowhere to hide. She read one message aloud before sending. Attached are records reflecting unresolved emergency access and compliance concerns related to the North Valley Transitional Care Access Corridor, including objections by county health facilities, compliance, staff, and communications suggesting pressure to bypass further review. These materials are being transmitted for immediate preservation and independent review. Nora nodded. Ben did too. Elena sent the first set, then the second, then the preservation notice. The whoosh of outgoing mail was tiny and final. Ben closed his eyes. Nora felt nothing at first. Then a strange mixture of dread and relief moved through her, like stepping off a curb and not knowing whether the street beneath was solid or traffic. Elena shut the laptop. There, she said. Now the world gets to choose what it is. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Ben's phone lit face down on the counter and buzzed once, then again. He stood so quickly the chair rocked backward. I see you. He looked at the screen, and the blood left his face. Nora stood too, uselessly. Ben answered, Yeah, I'm coming. He listened, eyes closing briefly, shoulders tightening with effort. Is she okay? Okay, I'm coming now. He hung up and looked at Nora. Rachel's awake again. Lily's out of surgery. His voice broke on surgery and stitched itself back together. They want me there. Go, Nora said. It came out as more plea than instruction. Ben grabbed the folder's empty shell, then stopped and left it on the table instead, no longer needing the disguise of paper around what was already loose in the world. At the door, he turned back once. For one suspended second, Nora thought he might say thank you, or I still hate you, or nothing at all. Instead, he said, If Rachel asks whether I trusted you, I'm telling her I trusted the file. Then he left. The door shut behind him with a soft apartment click so normal it was almost insulting. Nora stood in the dim living room, listening to the silence that followed, and knew he had given her neither forgiveness nor condemnation, only the most exact answer he could live with. Elena began packing the scanner and papers back into her bag. That, she said, was the easy part. Nora let out one frayed breath and looked at the legal pad, the coffee cup, the closed blinds, the life about to split into official versions. "I know," she said, and this time Elena did not tell her to stop. "I know," she said, and this time Elena did not tell her to stop. Instead, she zipped the scanner into her bag, slid the glasses off her nose, and looked at Nora with the expression of someone measuring structural damage in a building that was still technically standing. "Good," she said, "because in the next hour, you are going to lose at least one job, possibly your reputation in its current form, and whatever benefit came from people confusing your competence with stability." She swung the bag over her shoulder. "What you may keep is a defensible sequence of choices after the crash. Don't waste that by improvising." Nora nodded, though the words seemed to reach her from a distance. She walked Elena to the door. Her apartment felt subtly altered now, as if the air itself had stored the sound of those sent emails and would keep replaying it after everyone left. At the threshold, Elena paused. "If police call, they go through me. If Daniel calls, you can answer only if you want the pleasure of hearing a man discover consequences in real time, but say nothing substantive. If media call, absolutely not. If the Bennetts call..." She stopped, considered. "Actually, if the Bennetts call, answer. Carefully. The law and the human part aren't the same lane, and only one of them lets you sleep later." "Does anyone sleep later?" Nora asked. Elena gave a dry half-smile. "Badly, but some people earn the right to try." Then she left. The door clicked shut. Nora stood with her hand still on the knob, listening to Elena's footsteps recede down the exterior walkway, then the building's hollow stairwell echo swallowing them. Silence returned in layers. A car door outside. The faint shudder of plumbing in the wall from some neighbor running a dishwasher. The refrigerator motor kicking on. Her own breathing. Too fast, then slower when she paid attention to it. She walked back to the dining table and sat in the chair Ben had used. The manila folder shell remained where he'd left it. Empty now, bent at the flap, carrying the shape of urgency without its contents. She touched the edge once with 2 fingers, and then drew her hand back. Her landline rang. The sound was so abrupt in the apartment that she startled, despite expecting, abstractly, that consequences used phones to enter rooms. She crossed to the counter and picked up on the second ring. "Nora Whitaker. This is Diane Mercer with KCRA." Bright, brisk, already holding a sharpened version of the day in her mouth. "We're preparing a segment on last night's collision and house fire involving a local attorney. We've also received documents this morning raising questions about county redevelopment safety reviews. We'd like to give you an opportunity to comment." Nora shut her eyes. There it was. No dramatic delay. No fantasy window in which to become ready. The world had chosen pace. "No comment at this time," she said. "Will you deny that you were in possession of confidential mediation materials connected to Halverson Development at the time of the crash?" Nora felt something bitter rise in her throat. Not panic. Not exactly. But the sharp taste of being translated before you had finished existing. "No comment. Do you believe your firm attempted to suppress emergency access concerns flagged by county compliance staff?" The reporter's tone remained professionally neutral, which in some ways was crueler than aggression. Neutrality let you hear the shape of the story they already had. Nora pictured Rachel's note. Ben in the hospital hallway. Lily waking with a repaired leg and an injured memory. "No comment," she repeated, and ended the call. The phone rang again almost immediately. Daniel this time, presumably on the line Elena had failed to forbid or perhaps wisely left as a test of Nora's self-destruction. Nora stared at the receiver while it rang. Once, twice, 6 times. Voicemail picked up. A moment later, the answering machine light blinked, old-fashioned and accusatory. She let it sit. The landline rang again. "Mark," she answered. "How bad?" he asked without preamble. "Media already called." On the other end, she heard him exhale. "Jesus. That's becoming a theme. How are the Bennetts?" Rachel woke up briefly. "Lily's out of surgery. Ben was here." There was a long enough pause that she could hear Mark recalculating the universe. "At your apartment?" "Yes. And you're saying that like it's the 4th most surprising part of the morning." Nora sat down on the kitchen floor because her legs had decided for her. Cool tile pressed through her sweatpants. He brought documents from Rachel's locker. She'd been keeping records on North Valley. "We sent them to oversight." Mark went quiet again, but this time not from shock alone. He understood enough to recognize that a line had been crossed, which could not be uncrossed. "Was that the right move?" he asked. Nora leaned her head back against the cabinet. "I don't know. It was the move I could still live with for at least the next 10 minutes. That may be the best available standard." His voice softened. "Owen heard something on TV before I got to the remote. He knows there are documents. He's pretending not to care and standing very still in the kitchen, which is how you know he's terrified." Nora looked toward the silent living room where Owen's swim photo still clung to the fridge. Can you tell him Rachel woke up? Yes. And that Lily made it through surgery. I can tell him that too. Mark hesitated. You should know your firm called here. Some junior-sounding guy asking whether media might come by, and whether Owen should avoid school for a few days. He spoke like a hostage consultant. Nora closed her eyes. That tracks. I told him to lose my number. Thank you. That part I enjoyed. His pause this time was gentler. Do you want me to come over? The question hit somewhere deep, because it contained no strategy, no legal frame, no conditions, just the old simple offer of presence. Nora let herself imagine saying yes. Mark in the apartment making coffee too strong, sitting at the table while phones rang, existing beside her, not as husband, not as opponent, just as one more adult body refusing to leave her alone with fallout. The image was so tender and so impossible that it almost hurt more than refusing. Not yet, she said. I need to sit in what I did before anybody helps me make it livable. Mark was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like punishment. Maybe. You've always mistaken punishment for clarity, and you've always mistaken comfort for mercy. The old marriage flickered in the exchange, not fully hostile, not fully gone. Mark let out a breath that might have been a laugh if they had earned laughter. Fair enough. Call if the state shows up at your door. I will. After they hung up, Nora stayed on the floor. Sun had shifted enough to throw a hard strip of light across the entryway rug. Dust moved visibly through it. Such a small domestic detail, floating particles in morning light. And yet it nearly undid her because the world still insisted on being textured and beautiful in corners, while other corners burned. She got up when the answering machine light blinked a second time. Daniel's voicemail played at once, his voice controlled so tightly it sounded almost polite. Nora, do not take any further unilateral action. County Council contacted the firm. Media has documents that appear to have originated from privileged matter. You are suspended effective immediately, pending internal review. I've retained separate crisis counsel for the firm. Elena Ruiz called me, which is either a sign you've lost your judgment or found it too late. Call me back if you want any chance of coordinated defense. The machine clicked. Nora stood staring at it, suspended. Effective immediately. The phrase should have stung more sharply. Instead, it landed in a numb part of her that had been expecting nothing else. She had imagined dramatic endings to her time at Kessler and Wren when she was younger, storming out on principle, a righteous resignation, perhaps even a carefully worded departure, after exposing wrongdoing on her own terms. What she got was voicemail language from a man who used the word coordinated like a leash. There was something humiliatingly ordinary about it. Her apartment buzzer sounded again, and this time she felt no suspense at all, only weary procedure. She checked the panel. 2 uniformed officers and a suited investigator on the camera. State had indeed shown up. Nora buzzed them in and called Elena before they reached her door. She answered on the first ring. Are they there? Yes. Put me on speaker once they identify themselves. Do not invite anyone beyond the threshold unless there is a warrant. 3 minutes later, Nora stood at her doorway with Elena's voice tinny but firm from the landline on the side table. The investigator introduced himself, handed over a business card, and informed her that based on preliminary scene reconstruction, phone seizure review, and injury severity, the district attorney's office intended to file charges by afternoon. Felony reckless driving, causing bodily injury, unlawful use of a handheld device contributing to injury, and potential evidentiary review on the document matter pending separate assessment. He said it all in a practiced cadence, not cruel, not kind, just professionally insulated from the human face receiving it. Nora listened and felt a strange calm settle over her. Once the feared thing became a noun, you no longer had to spend energy imagining its outline. Am I being arrested now? She asked. Not at this time, he said. You will receive a summons to appear, and we request that you not leave the county. Request, Elena's voice inserted sharply from the table. Not order. The investigator inclined his head slightly toward the sound of the attorney he could not see. Correct. He also informed her that her vehicle remained impounded, her phone held pending warrant execution, and that any contact with the Bennett family should avoid discussion of the criminal matter. Elena answered that all substantive communication would go through counsel. The officers left. Their footsteps receded. The apartment closed around Nora again. Charged. Suspended. Under review. She repeated the phrases silently and felt less shock than exhaustion. She thought of all the people who moved through this same bureaucratic weather every day, without the luxury of surprise. Clients she had once represented when she still believed proximity to the system conferred immunity from its bluntest instruments. One of the cruelest American delusions was that education let you opt out of machinery. It didn't. It only taught you the names of the gears while they caught your sleeve. By noon, the story was everywhere local enough to matter and small enough to mutate. Clips from the neighborhood, the blown windshield, prominent attorney, confidential records, safety concerns. Teen undergoes surgery. Nora watched none of it, but she didn't need to. Snippets reached her anyway through the walls of silence. A neighbor knocking once and then retreating when Nora didn't answer. A text relayed through Mark that Owen had seen kids posting memes already. Elena updating her in curt calls. County Fire Oversight, acknowledged receipt. Inspector General's office requested meeting. Daniel's counsel alleging theft, privilege breach, and malicious dissemination. One planning official already placed on leave. Rachel was conscious for longer stretches. Lily was awake, medicated, asking direct questions in the way injured children did when adults failed to keep pace. Eli had drawn a picture of a red house, a gray blanket, and a woman with black lines for hair standing in front of flames. Ben had not sent it. He had only told Mark through some strange chain of necessity that Eli kept calling Nora the Fire Lady, which was perhaps the most merciful and least deserved title she would ever receive. Around 2 in the afternoon, Nora finally left the apartment. Not for court, not for press, not for strategy. She drove Mark's Subaru because he brought it over and tossed her the keys without comment after work, then took a rideshare back to his house before she could object. She went to Mercy General in the same sweatpants and borrowed jacket, carrying nothing but the landline transcribed number for the ICU desk, and the knowledge that she might be turned away. The hospital looked harsher in daylight, less dramatic, more administrative. Families rotated through its doors, carrying flowers, tote bags, paperwork, guilt. At the surgical floor reception desk, a nurse with tired, kind eyes checked a screen, made a call, and told Nora quietly, "Mr. Bennett says you may come for 5 minutes, not more." Nora nodded, as if 5 minutes were a country she had somehow been granted a visa to. Ben was in Lily's room, standing beside the bed, with one hand wrapped around the rail. Lily lay propped up against white pillows, pale but alert, her hair braided badly by someone without practice. Her left leg was elevated and boxed in dressings and hardware. Bruising bloomed at her temple in yellow-purple shadows. She looked heartbreakingly ordinary despite all of it, like any American middle schooler stuck in a hospital, except for the way experience had already made her eyes older than the rest of her face. Ben turned when Nora entered. He did not smile. He did not order her out. He simply stepped back half a pace, enough to make room but not enough to suggest ease. "You wanted to tell her," he said. Nora moved closer to the bed. Every instinct screamed that there was no correct script for this, no set of sentences approved by law or grief or childhood. Lily watched her with grave concentration, the same searching stare she had given in the rain. "Hi," Nora said. "Hi," Lily replied. Her voice was rough but steady. Nora swallowed. "Your dad told me you were wondering whether any of this was your fault." Lily's fingers worried the edge of the blanket. "Maybe if I didn't go outside." "No," Nora said. "This was not your fault." Lily kept looking at her. Children knew how to wait past adult simplifications. Nora forced herself not to retreat into polished reassurance. "I looked at my phone while I was driving," she said. "That was my fault. The fire was not your fault either." Lily's mouth tightened. "Mom said she told me to stay in." Ben's face shifted sharply at that, pain moving behind the eyes. Nora kept her gaze on Lily. "Adults tell kids things all the time that kids don't follow exactly. That doesn't make kids responsible for everything that happens after. It makes adults responsible for taking care of what happens next." Lily absorbed that slowly. "Did you save Eli because you felt bad?" she asked. The room became very still. Ben looked at Nora once, then away, giving her the question entirely. Nora could have said yes or no, and both would have been lies by omission. She took a breath. "I saved Eli, because he was there and needed help. I also felt bad. I feel bad now. People can do the right thing for mixed-up reasons. It still matters that they do it." Lily studied her, not satisfied exactly, but engaged in the way children became when adults stopped talking like greeting cards. "Are you a good person?" she asked. Ben shut his eyes briefly. Nora felt the answer moving through every version of herself she had ever claimed. Lawyer, mother, wife, once, driver, rescuer, threat, whistleblower, maybe, defendant now. None of them fit cleanly enough to offer a child. "I think," she said carefully, "I'm a person who did something bad and then tried to do something good after, and now I have to live with both being true." Lily considered that for so long, Nora thought perhaps she had gone too far into complexity. Then the girl gave the tiniest nod, as if not approving but filing it somewhere. "Okay," she said. Ben looked at his daughter, then at Nora. Something in his posture loosened by one invisible notch. Not forgiveness, not peace. Just one muscle choosing, briefly, not to stay clenched. The nurse appeared in the doorway and gave Nora the kind of gentle look that was actually an instruction. Time. Nora nodded. She turned to go, then stopped and looked at Ben. "How is Rachel?" Ben answered after a beat. "Awake. Furious." Which is apparently a good sign. The line was so dry, so worn with love, that despite everything, Nora felt a brief, painful warmth at the edges of it. She asked whether the file got checked, he added. I told her yes. Nora let that settle. Good. She walked out before she could damage the moment by wanting more from it. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall beside a hand sanitizer dispenser and closed her eyes. Charged. Suspended. Exposed. None of that had changed. Rachel was still in ICU. Lily would limp through months of healing and remember headlights for longer. Owen still did not want to see her today. Daniel would keep fighting on one front while disowning her on another. The county would investigate, and maybe bury less than usual, because too many eyes had arrived too quickly. Nothing had been solved. No balance sheet had cleared. Yet standing in the antiseptic hospital light with her own breath finally evening out, Nora understood that the story of the day was no longer whether she could escape consequences. She could not. It was whether consequences would remain the only language spoken over what had happened. Down the hall, a transport aide wheeled Rachel Bennett past toward Imaging, pale against the pillow, oxygen tubing in place, eyes half open but unmistakably alive. For one brief second, Rachel's gaze slid toward Nora and held. No smile. No absolution. Just recognition, steady and unsentimental, between two women who had spent too long inside systems that preferred polite delay to honest danger. Rachel lifted 2 fingers from the blanket, barely an inch, a motion so small it could have meant anything. Nora, without thinking, mirrored it with her own hand. Then the gurney kept moving, wheels humming over the polished floor, and the moment was gone, absorbed into the hospital's relentless forward motion. Nora stood there until the corridor emptied again. Then she turned toward the elevators, toward court dates and headlines, and her son's damaged trust, and a future narrower than the one she had woken into the day before. She walked anyway, not because she believed walking made her redeemed, and not because she thought truth had won, only because the doors kept opening, and there was no honest life left for her except the one that continued after they did.